Hello and welcome to the Alberta Update, our year-end interview, our year-end conversation with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. I'm your host, Bruce McAllister. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to a great half an hour or so conversation with the Premier who joins us for this. You've done a ton of these with the networks, and now you get to do one with me.
Our last chat of 2025.
You know, it's interesting. We're both, former media people.
That's right.
So we ought to be comfortable doing this. But
I'm going to sit back.
I'm still going to ask you tough questions.
I know you will.
So much to talk about this year. You know, I made some notes earlier, and I'll refer to them once in a while. I may grab my phone because I have a couple of questions there. But I think it would be best to start with, the Memorandum of Understanding. I don't know if he would want me to say this publicly, but I'm going to. I ran into Joe Lougheed the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Great guy. And Joe said, I think this was Premier Smith's Lougheed moment.
Oh my gosh.
This was huge for Alberta. Nobody saw that.
It really was. When I first got elected, I read about the Great Wars with Ottawa between Peter Lougheed and the first Trudeau Prime Minister. And it was shocking to me how history repeats. The difference this time was that Pierre Elliott Trudeau wanted to steal our wealth, and Justin Trudeau wanted to end our wealth. And you could see, because it didn't seem to matter what we put on the table, what kind of accommodations we were trying to make, how we were trying to find some common ground to get to 2050. We would have this table where I thought we were making progress, and then there'd be some crazy new policy that would be announced by Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. And so when the new Prime Minister came in, I had the very same conversation with him as we cannot reach 2026 targets on cars, or 2030 targets on emissions caps, or 2035 targets on a net zero power grid. And if we can start talking about a longer time horizon, not only can we restore the health and investment into our main energy sector, our conventional energy sector, but it will pave the way for the innovations that will also be able to support some of the new innovations coming down. So we managed to have a meeting of the minds. It took a little while, but we ended up getting there, and I think that we had I think it was a pretty positive outcome. I
know you will hold the Prime Minister's feet to the fire. So many Albertans know that about you. We don't doubt it, those of us that know you closely. You said for a long time the nine bad laws have got to go, so investment will come back. That's already happening on the natural gas side.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think when you look at the two big things that we were advocating against over the last 3 years, one was don't bring through an emissions cap. There were countless consulting firms and analysts who said an emissions cap, such a rigid time frame, no time to develop the new technology. The only way to achieve it is to shut in production. We were looking at potential of 2 million barrels a day being shut in by 2035. Same thing with natural gas. When I came in, the only projects that were on the docket were for solar and wind. And of course, as you know, you can't bring on solar and wind unless you've got natural gas as a backup. And why not? Because they would have had to turn those plants off in 2035. And so that was what we were facing, which is why those two laws in particular had to go. And we're already beginning to see that the number of different companies are talking about expanding their pipeline access. So whether it's Enbridge optimizing with another 400,000 barrels, or Trans Mountain optimizing with another 360,000 barrels, or South Bow talking about a way of using the Keystone assets to build a new pipeline down to the south. That is already in active conversation, and that's a result of the emissions cap being gone. And then the net zero power regs, I just saw Capital Power saying that was one of the reasons that have given them confidence to invest in new natural gas generation to power data centers. There's another announcement about a European company looking at filing an investment decision on a few more. So these are things don't happen by accident. They happen with good policy. But the worst part of it is these kinds of investments get stopped by bad policy, which is why we knew we needed to get the policy framework right.
It's brutal to Canadians, certainly to Albertans, that you had to work so hard to do what seems so common sense, because in the United States, they don't do this. They don't step on their own hands to limit development. So critics of this MOU and critics of Ottawa will say, I don't know that I trust them to follow through. To that, will you explore every possibility to get our oil and gas to Tidewater, even if that means, the U.S. or some other route?
The purpose of this whole exercise and the recalibration Canada has done has been because our relationship with the United States turned out to not to be as solid as we thought it was when President Donald Trump got elected. And I think every single premier started looking at their trade ties and realized, my gosh, we trade a lot more north-south, more so than we do east-west. And we don't really have developed international markets. And so everybody was talking about how do we work together to trade more with each other and to work together to find new markets. That's where the genesis of the Northwest BC Coast Pipeline came from, is that was the project that should have been built years ago, got all the approvals, it got canceled by the previous administration. And it seemed like with this spirit of esprit de corps, this was the time for us to do it. That being said, there's clearly some of the same old backward attitudes that have emerged, and we've got to do a lot of work to make sure that we make the case. I think we will. But in the meantime, we have always known that the Americans under this new president are looking for more of our product. The Americans are in a situation now where they're at about 13.5 million barrels a day. I think they consume about 20 million barrels a day. They've got to get the rest from somewhere else, and that somewhere else is largely Canada. And if they aren't able to continue increasing and expanding their production, then they're going to need to have additional sources. And again, Canada just makes a lot of sense, and Alberta in particular. So yes, I think I've been saying it's all of the above. It's north, east, west, and south. And I've been encouraged to see that the U.S. ambassador to Canada, and I heard the consul general, who is centered in Calgary, have both expressed optimism about that agreement. I think they see that it's going to be good for the U.S. as well.
You mentioned U.S. President Donald Trump. I'm not sure he was in office yet when we sat here last year.
I know, isn't that crazy? He would have been elected because they do their elections in November, but he doesn't get inaugurated until January.
That's right. So, wow, what a year it's been. On that note, you traveled to the U.S. a lot to make sure that our industries and province was protected against any potential tariffs. You succeeded in that. But you also travel to the Middle East and other places because for a long time, the federal government just did not carry our message. Do you feel that worked and was worth the investment, and will you continue to?
Well, I'm also International and Intergovernmental Affairs Minister. And I was quite inspired by Quebec. I was looking at their strategy. They have doubled the number of international offices that we do, and a diplomatic corps that is quite large. I think it's a couple of hundred individuals. And they have always known that if they want to succeed in the international marketplace, in trade, in investment attraction, in people attraction, they've got to do the job themselves. And so I looked at that and I thought, who is the best? I mean, are we really going to rely on Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault to be selling the message about responsible Alberta energy development around the world? I mean, it was absurd to even think it. So it was very natural for me to go to conferences in the U.S. Going to the Middle East was maybe threefold. One was to find out what they're doing on these same kind of innovations for carbon capture utilization and storage, nature-based solutions, and direct air capture. I was quite surprised to see that they're moving along the same track that we are. Another one was that we have a lot of service companies that do great work for us here, but also want to be able to sell into those large oil-producing markets. So that was a second reason to go. And the third is inspiration on a sovereign wealth fund. That we sadly, you mentioned Joe Lougheed, he's now the head of our Heritage Savings Trust Fund, and thank heavens, I think we're in good hands.
Yep.
But if only we had kept the investment income in that fund from the time that Peter Lougheed had established it, it would be worth probably $250 billion or more now. And so now we started that. We've already doubled it in size since the UCP got elected in 2019, and we're going to keep on going so that we can not only partner with some of the sovereign wealth funds around the world when it comes to really good investments on behalf of Alberta taxpayers, but also so that we have the stabilizer in the event that we continue to have volatility in oil and gas. So so that was one. Going as well to Asia, knowing that we have ready markets in Japan and South Korea, especially when you look at the Port of Prince Rupert. It's a straight run of about 8 to 10 days from there, so that's going to be a very important port for us, not only for energy, but also for food and fiber and anything you can put on a rail car. And then in addition to that, going to Mexico and beginning the relationship directly with Mexico. We do have a CUSMA, Canada-US-Mexico agreement, and yet the amount of trade that we do with Mexico is very small, but I think there's a lot of opportunity, and after coming back, they sent a delegation from their national oil company to learn a thing or two about the things that we're doing here. So every single trip I've gone on has built really good relationships and potential future partnerships and great opportunities for our businesses to do business elsewhere.
One of the terrific roles that I have in here with your office is to deal with the stakeholders, and I can tell you there has not been one businessman in this city that has not come in here and said they love to see you abroad carrying Alberta's water. So for what it's worth, let's pivot. Education. Boy, a teacher strike is hard in so many angles. So many people, the kids, the parents, the teachers, the economy, day home everything.
Yeah.
And it's tense and it's emotional. Was there a time during that you thought, oh boy, I don't know where this is going?
It was sad because it just in some ways was so unnecessary, because we had heard the teachers loud and clear saying that complexity and aggression were an issue. We were in the process of getting our task force to tell us some of the observations that they were making. We'd made great progress at the table when it came to the foundations of what do we pay teachers? $70,000 to start, $119,000 at the top of the pay scale 10 years in. That is a very fair settlement when you look at what the wages are in the rest of the country. And yet, that complexity issue seemed to me that what was one that they wanted to bargain it, the leadership wanted to bargain it at the bargaining table, and we knew we had to solve it by putting together a cabinet committee. So I know that there was a lot of frustration, but I hope that we're addressing it in the way that is going to be meaningful. One of the first things that we did after the strike ended was that we asked our teachers to tell us what's going on with your classroom, how many are oversized. And there are actually, most of our classes are within our class size guidelines. There's some that are moderately over, and there's a few that are over 35, and those ones are going to get our attention. But the bigger issue is the complexity. When we hear stories of classes of 30 or 27 of the kids don't speak English, then you say, okay, we have to put dedicated resources into addressing English language learners. We now have 96,000 kids in our public system that are identified as English language learners. That is
Up from what?
Up from 47,000 a few years ago. So it's double.
So double.
In 3 years. So when you see that kind of pressure, that it's pushed the system almost to the point of breaking. And it just means we're going to have to try some new techniques to get those kids up to a level of language understanding that they can fit seamlessly into a classroom. That's one part. The other part is the aggression. Just to hear some of the stories of class clearings where a kid is acting out violently and they take everybody out of the classroom, disrupting the education for all those students, and the violence, teachers and students talking about it getting punched and kicked. This is unacceptable. We wouldn't put up with it in any other workplace, and we can't put up with it here. So we've heard the teachers loud and clear, and now it's a matter of getting the targeted resources, whether it's a school resource officer, sheriff or police, whether it's a social worker, whether it is an education assistant or some mental health expert, or another teacher or an education assistant. We have to get the right resources to ensure those classrooms become more manageable.
Okay, because we're on education, I'm going to follow up with this one. You and your cabinet determined this year that we had some pornography in the libraries of our schools. You demanded that be removed.
We couldn't believe it. Last year, remember, we brought in the cell phone ban in the classroom because we were hearing that the kids were potentially being bullied or being exposed to things they shouldn't be on while they're in the classroom. And so that was really well received. And then we had parents saying, there's some really inappropriate material, graphic novels that have pornographic images that are in my kids' library, and they're only in elementary school. And so when we looked for some of these titles, we just said, well, we've got to take those out of the schools. That's not appropriate at all. We have to make sure we've got age-appropriate materials at all levels. And so we put through a change. It was misinterpreted, I think. We've clarified that. But it was never about banning Ayn Rand or Handmaid's Tale. It was about getting rid of sexually explicit images in some of these books. And so I think that has now been clear. And I'm hopeful that we're not going to see any of those problems in future.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the media, and I don't want to make this a rip on the mainstream media segment. You'd never do that, I would, but we shouldn't. We're both from that industry. Yeah. But the point is, that was labeled a book ban by a lot of people in the media for a long time. It was never that.
No.
And eventually the right message did get to people, and sadly, the images had to be shared about what was in these materials. How do you combat that as the leader of the government in the province, that when you see continually things out there that you're saying, woo, that's not what we're doing?
Well, it was disappointing, and it was just one school board that had put out the list that they were going to take out. So it was the school board that was intending to take those books out. And my understanding is that they used AI to look for certain words in their library. And that was, again, never the intention. I don't want to get too graphic on it, but we went online and said, graphic images, here's what we're trying to take out. And I think that anyone who went and looked, a reasonable person would say that you should do that. But we also accept that there are also advocacy groups that want to make a point and want to imply that what we're doing is taking it further than what we ever intended. But the joke I've made is, look, if people know that there's sex scenes in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and they go to the library and read that, then, well, maybe they might pick up a little philosophy along the way, read a little bit about capitalism and entrepreneurship. Maybe there's an upside to that.
Okay. Listen, let's leave that one where it is and go somewhere else. The healthcare is always a huge story. You restructured it again this year. There's some good news there, but there are a lot of complex stories around it, and I'm not sure it always gets to the public. Are you happy with where that's at?
I really am. I think that when I describe what we were trying to do, it didn't become apparent until we got to the end of it, and we finally put the last pieces in place. One of the main things that I learned in looking at universal systems around the world is you can't have the purchaser, the provider, and the evaluator all be the same entity. We were giving the money to AHS. AHS was providing the service and responsible for writing contracts with their competitors. And at the end, they'd say, oh, we're doing just great, just give us more money. And so you didn't have any genuine accountability. So we had to split those roles, and that's part of the reason why we have Acute Care Alberta. We're now the purchaser. We're going to contract with AHS and Covenant and 50 different charter surgical centers, and we're going to make sure that we get the best results. And we have Health Quality Alberta, which is an independent agency that will help us in evaluating their performance. And that's how the system should work. So that's one part of the restructuring. The other part is our hospitals have to be hospitals again. We have to have AHS focus on delivery in their 106 hospitals that they manage on our behalf. They've got to be focused on the patient experience when they walk in the door all the way to when they receive treatment and are either admitted and discharged. And they have to have a good experience when they go in for surgery. That is the job of AHS, and now they're very focused on that. There's another job, though, which is primary care. Everybody needs to get attached to a family doctor or nurse practitioner, and that's a role that Adriana is going to take on. She's going to help with the patient experience from the moment you see a doctor and you think you might have something wrong, to get your diagnostic test to your specialist, to ultimately get your treatment. So that's sort of the second pillar of our health system. The third one is mental health and addiction, which really is a specialty. We observe that a lot of our pressure on our hospital rooms has come from the homeless population, those with mental health and addiction, who didn't have anywhere else to go. So we're creating an avenue and different beds for them to go to, 1,000 new beds for recovery and treatment, as well as even in our corrections facilities, our therapeutic living units. That's a whole other area that is being spearheaded by Rick Wilson, and in combination with with First Nations communities building out specialty centers. The final pillar is assisted living and social services. That continuing care has been more treated like a medical bed that might also have housing. We're flipping that around, saying it's more of a housing type of problem with medical treatment. And it's a very different approach when you take it that way, because I think most people, as they age, they want home care to support them living at home as long as possible, and then go into independent living, go into assisted living and have home care come in and help them there until the point where they might need long-term care. And it's an entirely different system with a different focus, and that's what Jason Nixon is leading. So I hope that as people see, the reason we needed to do that is because we had really specific problems in each one of those areas that required the drive of a really competent, focused minister in each one to be able to drive along the change. And I think we're going to see some really amazing things in the next year.
Minister Nixon and his team have been amazing. They all have. We haven't talked much about or maybe we have, but the public doesn't see it as much, the amount of doctors that have come to Alberta, the amount of nurses that have come to Alberta. record numbers of people coming here, but the medical agencies, or the union-driven ones, always put something negative into the press. And this is terrible. You've got to be happy with the people that are coming to Alberta to practice.
Well, I guess that is, nothing succeeds like success. And what we knew we needed to do is that we needed to create a simplified billing structure so that a physician could take on a patient panel and then be able to deliver the care, whether that person was there for one visit or whether they had a chronic condition that they needed to be managed. And so now that we have a different funding model, we have over 734 doctors or nurse practitioners taking new patients. So we've created a model where they're rewarded for having a larger panel. We now have nurse practitioners, 90 of them, that are able to have their own patients. And that's part of the reason why I think people are moving here, is that they see that there's a real opportunity to practice.
Is it true we discovered there were like more than 500,000 Alberta healthcare cards than there are people, and some of the data around visits to the ER, I've heard some
this is the thing that you discover again when you put a minister in charge, the things that you didn't know that you didn't know until you got there. And one of the things Adriana LaGrange discovered is we have over 500,000 more Alberta healthcare numbers than we have people living in Alberta. And we need to get to the bottom of that, because maybe it's people who moved away and just forgot to cancel their card. Maybe it's people who are holding on to their card because they think Alberta healthcare is the best, and they come back and receive treatment even though they're no longer a taxpayer here. But we can't allow that. We've got to protect our taxpayers. So we're going to be adding that healthcare number to the back of a driver's license starting next year, and then we'll be able to get to the bottom of why there is that difference. But that's really what we're trying to do, is to make sure that Albertans get the very best care, whether it's their experience getting a family doctor, nurse practitioner, or whether it's when they walk into a surgical suite and are able to get the care that they need. Minister Jones as well, he's launched an acute care action plan to build new towers, one in Calgary, 2 in Edmonton, so we can get more acute care beds. But on top of that, 50,000 new surgeries so that we're able to clear that backlog of people who've been waiting for too long. And part and parcel with that has been the work that Jason Nixon has done. We've had a large number of alternative level of care patients waiting for continuing care, waiting for a place in a nursing home. And he's announced that we're going to be building out 1,500 new beds a year for the next 10 years. That'll allow for us, and when somebody comes into hospital, then they're ready for discharge, rather than languishing in a hospital for weeks or months or literally years. They're now going to be able to have a place to go that's more like home. And I can tell you all of my ministers are very focused on executing on that plan over the next couple of years.
Let's pivot to Alberta next. This might be a bit of a longer question, which will enable you to get a drink, because my goodness, I ask you a lot of questions. This one, though, does need some setup. You determined that you wanted to travel around the province, and you wanted to hear from Albertans on the issues dealing with Ottawa that they're so frustrated with. So you did that. I had the pleasure of moderating those, and I'll say, chaos. There were chaos agents at everyone, and their goal is to take it off the rails. Every single one of those events, when you get that all settled down, the majority of the people in all of those rooms, including Edmonton, supported the things that you and your government are doing and changes to the issues you're talking about. So why did you think it was necessary to do that tour? And what do you take away from it?
You know what happens a lot in politics is that there's a party process, and party members spend a lot of time talking about policy and really interesting ideas, but the regular citizens are just too busy with their lives to really think about some of the things that might need to be changed. So you want to make sure that the things you talk about at party conventions have some resonance in the general public. That's always the challenge when you get elected, is that you want to make sure that what you're doing has the support of the majority of the people. And so we had surveys, we had in-person meetings, we had live streaming, we had surveys that we did and polling, and we have a report that offers up some recommendations about where to go. And we'll be discussing that in the new year to see which items will go to a referendum and which ones we'll act on immediately and which ones we might not end up acting on at all.
The thing that I heard loud and clear at every single one we did was that immigration is a problem. Too many, too fast, the strain, it's not how we move forward. Are you gonna deal with that?
Well, we certainly, I think in some rooms it was a unanimous support for us taking more control over immigration, similar to how Quebec has. I mean, Quebec has an agreement with Ottawa, and our Constitution does say, Section 95, that provinces should be taking the lead on developing an immigration policy, which just makes sense. When Quebec leads on their immigration policy, they're leading based on language and culture. Alberta would lead on jobs, because one of the things that we need is somebody to come and help us with vacancies we have in our job market. And if it's a good fit, then they have a pathway to become a permanent resident. And if they stay here long enough, they'll become a Canadian citizen.
And
that's
you're not
the
talking
pathway.
about the job market at the retail store or the fast food restaurant.
We're talking about the high-skilled jobs, many of them in agriculture. I mean, I look at our two big slaughterhouses, one in High River, one in Brooks, the area that I represent. Those are high-skilled jobs, and many of the ones in agriculture, those are genuine seasonal workers. So we're not talking about the agriculture worker, but there's a lot of tech employees that want to be able to come here and have a pathway to permanent residency.
Healthcare and
There'd
trades.
be energy, healthcare, exactly. A lot of trades. We did our when we did do our call and had a special tax credit for skilled trades. We were trying to attract more welders and electricians, but it was never intended to be Tim Hortons and McDonald's and A&W employees, because those are the jobs that young kids are looking for to get their first experience in the job market. And so when we were looking at the very, very large number of temporary foreign workers that are in those positions, and seeing that our youth unemployment rate had spiked up to almost 20%, that's what we started hearing at the town halls, is wait a minute, my son, my daughter, my grandson, my granddaughter, they've put out dozens of resumes and haven't even gotten a call back. What's going on here? That's one part of the problem. The other one, when we were talking about education, we had one of our school boards was talking about reducing its number of student spaces by 14,000 in 2022. That was what their projections were about where their enrollment was going. Fast forward 3 years, 85,000 new students in our schools, which has prompted us to do an $8.6 billion school build. That's what happens when you have a large number of people coming all at once. You just can't build schools fast enough. People often writing in about how they can't find a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a doctor. That's one of the other pressures you have. We fortunately have a great construction industry that really listened to our call, build more houses, build more rental property, because we were seeing home prices spike and rent spike. And when you look at the issue around food affordability, that is really caused by the pressure of inflation being driven by a huge out of control population growth. I mean, I think one of everything that you're seeing pressure on has been exacerbated by the fact that we have had an immigration policy that hasn't matched our ability to absorb the newcomers. One of the things that we talked about is that in Alberta Next is that before COVID, the federal government would bring in 300 to 500,000 newcomers, a totally manageable amount on a point system. One of the points being that you had to know one of the local languages. Post-COVID, we were seeing 2 million people per year for the last 3 years. It just pushed our social services to the point of near breaking. We're glad that the federal government recognized it. They've dialed it back, but it's going to take a couple of years for us to be able to catch up.
Okay. You have used the notwithstanding clause a few times. You've taken a lot of flack for that. And you've also gotten a lot of support. I think about the teacher strike, some of the trans bills. Is it hard to use that legislation, or are you just so determined and so principled that we have to do this?
I never thought that. I remember people used to ask me about that when I first came in, and I couldn't really foresee of a circumstance where I would use the notwithstanding clause. But then I saw that the activists are going after the kids. And it's one thing for a person to make a decision about what their life choices are as an adult, whether it's surgery, whether it's medical intervention, whether it's changing their name. But when you're a 10-year-old child, you're too young to make a decision that might have a permanent impact on your ability to have kids. That's why we knew we had to stop the use of puberty blockers for minors 15 years of age and younger, stop surgeries until a person has become an adult and understands the consequences of what that means. It also meant that we had to make sure that parents were not going to be separated from what was going on with their kids. We'd heard stories of maybe well-meaning adults referring kids to gender clinics without the parents' knowledge, being called a different name without their parents' knowledge. And that's a devastating thing to do to a child, to separate them from their parents that way, and a devastating thing for parents too. And then the increasing stories that we heard about the danger of born male athletes competing in women and girls sports. We just knew that we might have been a little bit ahead of the conversation, but when the CAS report came out in the United Kingdom, when you see that the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, now New Zealand and the United States are all going down the same pathway as we are, saying, you know what, this medical intervention has not been tested. We don't know what the long-term consequences are. The watchful waiting has been the previous way that you deal with kids who have this kind of gender confusion, and we're going back to that because we just think it's going to preserve all the choices for kids. The reason we had to use a notwithstanding clause in that case was because the court struck down one of our laws. And when you see how long it takes for a final decision to be made in a court, it could take 4 or 5 years. And we just thought the harm that could potentially come to the number of kids in the meantime, we just thought, we know we're on side with where our public is, and that's the role of an elected official. You got to make decisions. The role of the court is to offer their interpretation of it, but too often I think the court is overstepped and not given the proper deference to the legislatures.
Thank you. There's a reason that former Premier Peter Lougheed insisted on the notwithstanding clause, and the recent ruling by the Supreme Court of Canada in a 5-4 decision that there should be no minimum sentence for anybody possessing child pornography. Yeah. Is case in point.
It is. And the thing that is so, really underscores in that case is that it was a 5-4 decision. So when people say, oh, well, the court's decided, well, the court is often split
all 5
itself.
Judges appointed by Justin
Trudeau. Precisely. One more reason why we may have to start looking at how we can have more role in appointing judges, particularly in our courts here. But that's the reason why you all have to have an ultimate decider. When rights are in conflict, you do need the court to render an opinion on that. But the notwithstanding clause allows you to say, well, you know what, notwithstanding your opinion, we think this legislation is important. And we, as elected officials, are the ones who have to go to the public in the next election, and they'll render their opinion on our judgment. So that's the way it should be. I would say on the issue of the notwithstanding clause for having the teachers go back to work, that one, again, was an unusual use of the notwithstanding clause, but it should not have been unexpected. Peter Lougheed himself, when asked about it in the 80s, he said, if the courts declared a right to strike and prevented me from doing back to work legislation, I would have invoked the notwithstanding clause. The court indeed declared the right to strike in 2015. It's not written into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's one of these made-up rights that a single judge made up. And as a result, yes, we allowed the right to strike for 3.5 weeks, but kids have a right to an education. And so we knew that kids would be harmed if they stayed out any longer than 2 weeks. We had to get them back. So that's where the line is for me. When I look at it, I have a lot of latitude, as you know, being on the freedom side of our conservative movement, a lot of latitude for adults to make their own decisions. But when you've got kids being harmed, that becomes a point where politicians have to act.
Okay, let's pivot to the philosophical on some of these things, because people want to get to know their leader, and your approval ratings are going up. So you're doing something right. To that point, why do you? Like most politicians that people come to know, they don't take on the tough things when they smell danger. And I'll give you some examples. Healthcare restructuring, a lot of people would have said, ooh, don't go near that. You said it's not working, we gotta do it. The trans issues, you don't need to touch those. Yeah, but kids are in trouble. The pension, you might not get there, but you said we need to discuss it. So you sail right into these things that are controversial. Most don't. What drives you to do that?
Well, I've been a bit of a public policy nerd my whole life. I started looking at public policy in the 90s. And so there's a lot of things that I've thought about and written about and interviewed people about that I thought, gee, if I ever get a chance, I'd like to see if I could do something about that. And healthcare emerged very early on as one of those issues. And I know that I watched failed reform efforts year after year. Remember when Klein started thinking
Third way.
about reforms with the third way?
Yeah.
You know what he was worried about? He said that healthcare was 20% of our budget, and he was worried about it growing higher. Healthcare is now 45% of our budget.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder what would have happened if we'd put in some of the measures that we put in place today. And so that's one of the things that what we've looked at is what are the universal systems that are in Europe that work? And can we develop some of those practices to make sure that we're protecting universality so that no one ever has to pay out of pocket for medically recommended or necessary care, but those who opt on elective surgeries to pay out of pocket can. You know, the crazy thing that we were hearing, these wild stories about people being able to get care here, but only if they flew in a surgeon from some other province, or being able to get their surgeon to treat them, but only if they flew to a clinic in Toronto. You're thinking, what
are they, workarounds?
How is this is the crazy thing about our system, is that there were all of these ways in which people were trying to find a way around arbitrary rules that had been put into place. We're of the view, let's make it safe. We know we have excellent surgeons here, excellent facilities. Let's get people treated here. And if somebody wants to remove themselves from the queue, and that just allows for somebody else to get their treatment faster, we think that's going to help everybody. The way we'll monitor it is what we're saying to those who want to do what we're calling dual practice, is keep on doing the same surgeries for us and don't reduce it. But if you have spare time or you can get an extra operating room time, that's when you can take on private patients. And we'll be very open about what those numbers look like in the new year. We've got a portal that is going to be released in the new year so people can track and see what the number of surgeries have been done historically, and we're going to keep on doing the same number.
You know what you just did to me?
What's that?
You pivoted. I asked you a question on what philosophically drives you.
And I went back to policy.
You went right back to
Can't
policy.
help it. I'm a policy, as I said, how did I start it? I'm a policy wonk, and let me give you another example.
But I would say, okay, then I would just say what I see is somebody that's very solutions oriented.
Yeah.
How do we fix it? And it's Albertans want to see better healthcare, so good on you. A couple more. I know you've got some more interviews to do. I want to ask you about separation, and this could change literally from the time we do this to the time that it airs. You've got probably 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, maybe 5 Albertans that says, let's go. We've had it with Ottawa. You've got probably 1 in 3 Albertans that says, never, not a chance. We love our country. You've got to govern for everybody.
Yeah.
And so you won't be leading charges either way. How do you deal with those discussions?
Well, I am dismayed to see that because of the way we've been treated by Ottawa, the level of sentiment towards independence is as high as I've ever seen it. I've seen numbers ranging from 32% all the way up to 37%. That's a huge number of people who have given up hope on Canada. I haven't given up hope on Canada, and I think Canada can work. And so signing the MOU was one way that I demonstrated that we can find some area of common ground that has to be implemented, and I have to hold them to account. But it's not the only thing that people are frustrated by. People are frustrated that we run deficits here, and then Ottawa overtaxes us $26 billion and then spends money on equalization in only a handful of provinces, Quebec and Manitoba.
And yet Quebec doesn't have to claim its hydropower.
Completely, and neither does Manitoba. And so people are looking at that saying, you know what, maybe equalization worked for small provinces because it'd be less of a burden on the rest of us. But really, is this country meant so that the small provinces are transferring money to the big provinces so that they can have better social programs than we're able to afford here? Meanwhile, we're running deficits. That's a big problem. So that's one of the things that emerged from Alberta Next that we've got to deal with. The other issues around immigration, just the federal government just blew it over the past 3 years. They're getting it under control, but we've got to have a lot more control over that. The various issues like firearms. We don't believe that policing priorities or prosecution priorities should be going after law-abiding firearms owners or those who are going to defend themselves in their own home. And some of these new rules that are coming down on censorship, including removing the provision that allow pastors and church leaders to read scripture. Like those are things that people shake their heads and say, that is so foundationally opposed to the way we operate in Alberta. And so I wish that the federal government would stop doing those aggravating things, but Albertans should know that we're going to keep on fighting against these kinds of bad policies. And one of the tools that we have is the tool of non-enforcement and non-prosecution. And we're prepared to use that if there's some more dumb laws that come down.
It's going to be a tough year for the budget. And that said, Alberta will be in way better shape than most provinces, probably all of them.
Yeah.
And the federal government is just, they are in big trouble. So,
Yep.
what would your message be, looking to that? Is this a blip?
Well, one thing I would say is we need a better balance. This is why I mentioned the $26 billion more that Albertans pay in all variety of federal taxes that do not then come back to our province. We have to get a better balance. The federal government needs to reduce the amount of taxes it takes for its areas of responsibility and leave more tax room so that those can go to pay for the very expensive services that we have. The second thing would be is that Ottawa has got to stop invading our provincial jurisdiction, because they do this all the time. They come along and they offer a small amount of money, tell us how to run the program, and then the costs balloon, and then they're nowhere to be found to help with the cost sharing. There's a
Stay
second
in your
thing.
lane, right?
Well, that's exactly why they need to stay in their lane. I don't try to pass policy around defense or money, and they shouldn't try to pass policy around school lunch programs or
That's it.
dentistry. So those are a couple of the big problems. But the other is the lost decade. If we'd been able to build those 3 pipelines, Northern Gateway and Energy East and Keystone, and have 2.5 million barrels more of production, that would be generating an additional $55 billion a year in revenue, of which governments take about 40% of that. That would have helped solve our budget pressures. It would have helped solve the budget pressures at the federal level, would have helped solve the budget pressures of other provinces as they help us with the supply chain. That is the kind of lost opportunity of the last 10 years that we cannot replicate over the next 10 years. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get the dollars coming back in, to build out all of the other areas of the economy so that it can start generating revenues. But there is going to be this period over the next couple of years where the budget looks pretty ugly. When we balance our budget at $74, every time it's off by $1, that means $750 million doesn't come into our treasury.
It's been under 60.
It's been under 60. So you can do the math on that. It's about a $12 billion hole.
Okay, positives before we go to
Yeah.
2 more questions. First of all, job numbers. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism and the negative headlines that everybody likes to put out. But really, we just employed half of the people in the country of Canada.
It's remarkable.
It's amazing.
80,000 jobs created in 3 months. And I was so delighted to finally see the youth unemployment numbers going down. So they're down to 13.5%, still not where we want them to be, but much, much better than the ones I described before. Record housing starts. We're having the same number of housing starts as they are in Ontario, and they've got multiples more of population. That's having the effect of making it more affordable for a young person to buy a house, certainly more affordable for somebody to want to rent a place. We have, out of the 10 most affordable markets in North America, 7 of them are in Alberta. And so that should tell you something about things going in the right direction. We've brought our electricity prices way down. When I came in, they were 32 cents a kilowatt hour. They're now down around 1 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
Minister Newdorf does a lot of talking about.
Oh, it was
Good for him.
It was such a painful issue when we first came in, because it's one of those things you can't avoid the cost on. And look at all the advocacy we did to get rid of the carbon tax. Makes a big difference when you go to the pump and fill up. It has brought our gas prices down. Makes a big difference when we're getting into the winter with home heating. That carbon tax was costing $4 a gigajoule, almost 4 times the cost of the base price of gas on our home heating bills. So all of these things have had a huge impact on making life more affordable here. And when you've got good paying jobs, low tax environment, you get to keep more of what you earn, and the cost of living is lower than it is in other places. It's a very good story to tell. More work to do, there's no question about it. But I really feel like Alberta's leading the country, and we should be pretty proud of that.
2026. And anything in particular you're looking forward to, you see on the horizon that you want to prepare Albertans for? How are you envisioning 2026?
Well, 2026 we have to implement the MOU so that we can demonstrate that we've really come to terms with the federal government. I hope that we'll see the final investment decision on new power plants, new AI data centers. I hope that we see new pipeline expansions, because there's a couple of that are already in the works. I think we'll continue to see attraction of investment, whether it's for venture capital, whether it's for agri-food processing, opening up new markets. I think that we're going to continue to see our ties to Asia and to India are going to expand. I know that I've got a couple of ministers who are working on repairing that relationship there, and I think those are enormous markets and huge opportunity for us. I hope that we see a resolution in the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement to stabilize things, but I think for sure we're going to continue to sell energy to our American neighbors and friends, and also find new opportunities for critical minerals development, like lithium and various other things, and probably develop some MOUs with Saskatchewan and British Columbia on a whole range of areas of collaboration. So next year is, I think, the year that we see if Canada has realized that they've got to start building again, they've got to start generating revenue again, they've got to start investing in resources again, and I think next year is the proving year.
It has been an amazing year. You have brought an MOU here. If you could bring a pipeline, maybe a Stanley Cup to Alberta, you will
tall order.
you will go down in history.
Although I hear things are going pretty well on the building of the event center. I've been watching that progress. That one I think is ready in 2027. I'm hoping to see a big Battle of Alberta as the first game.
Thank you. I would like to see more talk about the Flames and less about the Oilers. Anyway, this is great. Appreciate your time. Thank you for all you do, and we'll chat again.
Thanks, Bruce. See you in 2026.
You bet. There is our Premier, Danielle Smith, with our year-end interview here on the Alberta Update, and we will be back, of course, with regular episodes of the Alberta Update when the legislature reconvenes in the spring. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year.